Beneath Vatican City exists one of the most restricted archival collections in the world, the Vatican Apostolic Archive, previously called Archivum Secretum Vaticanum. The term secretum originally meant private, but over centuries it became associated with secrecy and speculation. Today the archive contains more than 85 kilometres of shelving and over 12 centuries of records. Its operation follows strict procedures. Access is limited to approved scholars, who must request exact documents by reference. Independent searches are not allowed, and some catalogues remain incomplete. The collection includes papal decrees, diplomatic letters, and the trial documents of Galileo. These are verifiable parts of history. But beyond them lies a large body of material that remains unexamined. Items collected through centuries of missionary, diplomatic, and scientific activity under papal authority. From the 1500s onward, Catholic missions across the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia often sent archaeological and ethnographic materials back to Rome. These included tablets, inscriptions, and papyri whose origins were not always clear. Some entries in old inventories use ambiguous terms such as locus ignotus or origo incerta. A significant number have never been restudied with modern dating or linguistic methods. Because of its long history as a preserver of knowledge, the Vatican often became the final destination for unique or fragile finds. It inherited manuscripts rescued from collapsing empires and documents collected during the colonial period. Many of these artifacts predate Christianity by thousands of years, linking the Church's archive to the earliest layers of recorded human culture. Modern archaeology keeps pushing those layers further back. Discoveries like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to around 9600 BCE, and submerged settlements near Dwarka, India, suggest that organized societies may have existed long before Sumer, once regarded as the first civilization. If similar evidence had ever reached Rome during centuries of global exploration, it would likely have been stored, not publicized. This context fuels a persistent hypothesis that the Vatican may possess evidence, textual or material, of civilizations predating Sumer, preserved but not disclosed. Such a possibility does not imply conspiracy. It follows from the Church's consistent practice of conservation and controlled access. The Vatican's role has always been to protect historical materials until they can be studied responsibly. Still, unanswered questions remain. Among millions of uncatalogued or fragile documents, could there exist records from a world earlier than the one we recognize as history? Within those sealed chambers may rest data, linguistic, astronomical, or archaeological, that would shift our understanding of human origins. The Church rarely comments on such claims, emphasizing that preservation is its duty. Yet the question persists. Has the timeline of civilization already been discovered, quietly preserved beneath the city of God, waiting for recognition? Long before the cuneiform tablets of Mesopotamia, before the first Sumerian king etched his name into wet clay, humanity was already marking meaning into matter. Those marks, circles, triangles, crosshatches, have been found on shards of pottery and stone across the Old World, from the Balkans to Anatolia, from the Levant to the plains of Iran. To archaeologists, they are proto-writing, the flicker of language before language. To others, they are echoes, fragments of a communication system belonging to a civilization so old that even memory forgot it. In 1961, farmers in Tartaria, Romania, unearthed 3 small clay tablets covered with strange incised symbols. They were dated to around 5300 BCE, nearly 2,000 years older than the earlier Sumerian texts. Similar markings appeared on pottery from the Vinca culture in Serbia and on carved stones at Tel Brak in Syria. What unites them is their pattern, repeating motifs that seem to carry structure, grammar, intention. The mainstream interpretation is cautious. These were symbols, not true writing, a form of proto-record keeping rather than language. But when patterns repeat across thousands of kilometers, we must ask, were these cultures connected, or were they remembering something older? Now imagine that somewhere in the Vatican Apostolic Archive, amid the sealed boxes labelled Mineralia cum Scriptura incognita, rest similar artifacts gathered by missionaries who could not classify them. During the 17th and 18th centuries, Jesuit scholars travelled through Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Balkans, documenting ruins, inscriptions, and local legends. Their shipments to Rome included not just relics of the faith, but items of antiquarian curiosity. A few of those items, we know, were never catalogued publicly. One inventory entry from 1764 mentions 2 tablets of baked clay bearing characters not Hebrew, Greek, nor Arabic, origin uncertain. Another from 1822 describes small fragments from the East inscribed with geometric marks preserved in the private section. To a missionary of that era, such finds were curiosities. To modern archaeology, they would be revolutionary. Scientific imaging today shows that many proto-writing symbols share an astonishing degree of consistency. The so-called Vinca sign 22, a cross within a circle, appears across a dozen sites separated by thousands of miles. The same motif, drawn as a double spiral, also adorns ancient Maltese temples and the lintels of Göbekli Tepe. Such correspondences are dismissed as coincidence, yet probability suggests otherwise. Could the Vatican's hidden artifacts fill the missing links in this pre-Sumerian lexicon? The Church, after all, has been collecting manuscripts longer than any other institution on earth. Jesuit linguists were among the first to study the languages of the Near East. Their letters, still preserved in the Archivum Romanum Societatis Iesu, record encounters with inscriptions they could not read. Some of these correspondences even include sketches, now stored in private collections, that resemble the symbols later identified as Vinca script. For centuries, scholars believed writing emerged once in Mesopotamia as a sudden spark of civilization, but discoveries since the 20th century have shown that spark glowed in many places: Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, and perhaps even earlier, across old Europe. The puzzle is how such complex semiotics appeared fully formed, as though inherited rather than invented. Here lies the deeper question. If writing is a cultural invention, why does it seem to appear everywhere at once, in forms that already share structure? Unless, of course, what we call invention was actually recollection. It is possible that humanity carried this system through time, across floods, migrations, and rebirths, until only fragments remained. Later civilizations may have reinterpreted it. Sumer turned symbols into cuneiform, Egypt into hieroglyphs, the Indus into seals. What we see as independent origins might be branches of the same forgotten root. Some researchers call this root language the global script hypothesis. Though still fringe, it draws on a growing body of data, mathematical ratios embedded in symbol spacing, cross-regional recurrence of abstract forms, and now digital comparative analyses. Machine learning studies published in 2021 have shown statistically significant overlaps between Vinca markings and early Mesopotamian proto-cuneiform, patterns too consistent to be random. If these studies are correct, then the first human language may not have been spoken, but carved. And if that's true, the Vatican's archives, with their centuries of unexamined relics, might hold the connective tissue, tablets whose signs bridge the gap between prehistory and history. A set of symbols preserved not because they were understood, but because they were strange. In theological terms, this aligns with an idea older than archaeology, that the Word preceded the world. In the book of John, in the beginning was the Word, Logos. Early Christian mystics interpreted Logos as both divine speech and the cosmic blueprint of creation. If humanity once used a universal symbolic system, a language of the gods, its memory could have survived as myth, encoded in both scripture and stone. Imagine an artifact like that today, a hand-sized clay tablet resting under glass in the Vatican vault. Its surface bears no letters, only deep linear cuts and spirals, patterns that feel deliberate but untranslatable. Under multispectral imaging, faint pigment residues reveal a mathematical rhythm, the spacing between marks proportional to prime numbers. The archivist who examines it cannot read it, but senses it was never meant to be read, only recognized, a resonance between the human mind and something larger. Such speculation might seem romantic, but archaeology thrives on recovered fragments, shards that reframe everything we thought we knew. If the Vatican possesses even one authentic artifact of proto-writing, it would prove that the birth of civilization was not sudden, but cyclical. Humanity did not awaken in Sumer. It reawakened, remembering in fragments what it had once known. And perhaps this is why the Church remains silent. For the Vatican, whose mission is to preserve the divine narrative, such a discovery would shift the meaning of Revelation itself. If there were civilizations before the flood, literate, organized, intelligent, then Genesis would not describe the beginning of humanity, but its reconstruction. In the myths of every ancient culture, there is water, the kind that does not nourish but erases. From the Sumerian Eridu Genesis to the Epic of Gilgamesh, from the Egyptian Book of the Heavenly Cow to the Hebrew account of Noah, a deluge sweeps across the world, ending an age and washing away a forgotten order. For centuries, these stories were treated as metaphor, until geology began to prove otherwise. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, the planet underwent one of its most violent transitions. The glaciers melted, seas rose more than 120 meters, and entire continental shelves vanished beneath the waves. Geologists call this event Meltwater Pulse 1b. Archaeologists call it the silence before history. If civilization existed before Sumer, this was the moment it disappeared. Modern sonar mapping of the Persian Gulf reveals a drowned landscape beneath the waves, river channels, deltas, and terraces consistent with ancient floodplains. In 2007, a team led by Dr. Jeffrey Rose proposed that the Gulf, before it flooded, was once a vast oasis. The garden beneath the Gulf, supporting human habitation for millennia before the waters came. Sediment cores confirm it. Freshwater mollusks buried under marine silt, pollen traces from vanished grasslands, the fossils of rivers that no longer flow. But there's another source that tells of these lost lands, not from science, but from within the sealed corridors of the Vatican. In the 17th century, a Jesuit chronicler named Frate Duvinius compiled a strange manuscript now known among archivists as the Chronicon Duvi. It describes 9 cities built upon the plains of the Eastern Sea, their temples, harbours and watchtowers, and how they were swallowed by waters that rose beyond the measure of God's covenant. The surviving fragments are written in Latin, but refer to sources in a language neither Greek nor Chaldean. No public translation has ever been released. Officially, the Vatican has never acknowledged the Chronicon Duvi's existence, yet references to it appear in 3 18th century bibliographies of the Apostolic Archive. Its description of drowned settlements, written centuries before modern geology, matches the submerged river systems now known to lie beneath the Persian Gulf. Coincidence or continuity? The implications are staggering. If even a portion of this text derives from an ancient source, it would mean that someone, perhaps survivors of those drowned plains, recorded their own destruction long before Sumer's scribes wrote of it as legend. Evidence from around the world supports this possibility. Beneath the Indian Ocean, off the coast of Gujarat, sonar has detected the outlines of massive stone formations. walls, steps and courtyards now buried under 40 meters of water. Carbon samples from nearby wood fragments date to around 7,500 BCE. In the Black Sea, oceanographers have found similar ruins beneath a thick layer of marine sediment. And in the Gulf of Cambay, divers recovered pottery shards from an area once thought to be seabed since the dawn of time. These findings share one thing. Each lies on the drowned coastlines of the early Holocene, the very period when the seas rose. If these sites are indeed remnants of pre-Sumerian civilizations, then the flood myths of later cultures were not symbolic tales of moral cleansing. They were memories, inherited through survivors, copied into clay, transcribed into scripture. And the Vatican, as the inheritor of both the biblical and the classical traditions, may be the last custodian of that chain. If you find this connection between myth and memory fascinating, let us know what you think. Leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and help others discover these hidden chapters of our past. Among Jesuit field reports from the 18th century are mentions of bas-reliefs showing a boat upon a mountain, stars above, and men with animal heads below. One such relief, removed from southern Mesopotamia in 1713, was sent to Rome and catalogued under Classis Antiquarum Figurarum, ancient figurative class. Its whereabouts today are unknown, but the description matches Mesopotamian depictions of the flood hero Utnapishtim, centuries older than Noah. Perhaps that is why the Church has always been cautious about these stories. If the deluge described in Genesis was not a local event, but a global cataclysm, then its survivors were not chosen few, but remnants of a fallen civilization that predated all recorded faiths. Science, meanwhile, continues to verify the scale of the flood. Ice core data from Greenland shows a sudden spike in global temperatures around 11,600 BCE, the end of the Younger Dryas, when meltwater cascaded into the oceans at catastrophic rates. Paleoclimate models indicate sea level rises of several meters per century, enough to erase entire lowland cultures within a few generations. Imagine the trauma of such an age. Cities turned to islands, then to reefs. Rivers reversed course. The sun itself might have seemed angry, its reflection broken into endless fragments across the swelling seas. Those who escaped inland would have carried with them the only thing they could: memory. Myths of great floods, of divine punishment, of the world reborn from the deep. In this light, Genesis is not theology, but testimony. Perhaps that is the real function of the Chronicon Duvi, not a secret of heresy, but a preservation of testimony, a record of humanity's first extinction event. If so, the Vatican's decision to keep it hidden is understandable. Such a document would blur the boundary between scripture and prehistory. It would suggest that the earliest books of the Bible are not revelations of divine origin, but codified memories of an earlier human world. For an institution built on the idea of a single creation, such an idea would be revolutionary or dangerous. And yet, the evidence continues to surface, wave by wave. In 2018, sonar scans of the Arabian Gulf revealed geometric anomalies beneath layers of sediment resembling the foundations of walls. These anomalies lie precisely along the submerged Paleo River known as the Kuwait Ridge, dated to 8000 BCE. When researchers overlaid the pattern of these structures on modern maps, they formed the outline of a delta, and within that delta, 9 elevated plateaus. 9 plateaus, 9 drowned cities. Was the Chronicon Duvi merely a medieval legend? Or was it a faint echo of a civilization that once flourished there, whose last words were carried through time? From silt to script, from scripture to vault. The Vatican's silence in this case may not be obstruction but reverence. To hold in its archives the testimony of the world before Sumer is to hold the memory of the first world to die. As the waves recede, we next step leads inland, across the deserts of North Africa, where the sand hides a different kind of flood, one of wind and time. There, beneath the dunes, another civilization may sleep, its ruins mapped not in water but in dust. Before the Sahara became a sea of sand, it was alive. Between 10,000 and 5,000 BCE, the period scientists call the African humid phase, rain fell across what is now one of Earth's most desolate landscapes. Vast lakes stretched across Chad and Libya. Rivers cut through what are now dunes. Herds of giraffe, elephants, and cattle roamed the grasslands. For thousands of years, this green Sahara was a cradle of human life until the monsoon shifted, the rains died, and the desert swallowed everything. But what if something more than grasslands disappeared? For decades, archaeologists have found anomalies scattered across the Sahara's edge. Stone alignments, eroded platforms, and buried walls that appear and vanish with the shifting sand. Some are prehistoric tombs, others no one can explain. The most striking are the megalithic sites of Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, a stone circle older than Stonehenge, aligned precisely to the summer solstice. Around it, archaeologists found traces of huts, hearths, and wells, evidence of settlement, of planning, of community. The standard interpretation is that these were ritual centers built by nomads, the first signs of organized religion in Africa. But what if Nabta was just the surviving edge of something larger? Satellite imaging has revealed geometric anomalies beneath the sand of Libya, Niger, and Algeria. Faint lines forming rectangles and arcs invisible from the ground. Some appear to outline massive enclosures, hundreds of meters wide. To skeptics, these are mirages of erosion. Yet a few have near-perfect alignment to cardinal directions, an accuracy impossible to achieve without instruments or astronomy. It was here, in the early 20th century, that French explorers recorded a curious legend among Tuareg nomads, of cities that sleep beneath the dunes, whose walls emerge after great storms and vanish again with the wind. They called them Al-Mudun al-Na'ima, the sleeping cities. The idea was dismissed as myth until decades later, a Jesuit geologist working in the Gilf Kebir Plateau reported seeing what he described as a line of jointed stone blocks forming an arc, perfectly fitted, buried by sand. His notes, preserved in Rome, mention an engraved basalt fragment, concentric circles intersected by rays. The fragment, he wrote, was sent to the Vatican for preservation. It has never been seen again. If true, this would not be the first time the Church intervened in archaeology. In the 19th century, Jesuit missions in North Africa operated under papal charter, combining theology with scientific observation. Their findings, fossils, pottery, even human remains, were routinely shipped to Rome. Some of those crates marked simply Ex Africa Missione remain unexamined in the Apostolic Archive. To modern geology, the idea of a lost Saharan civilization is not impossible. Around 8000 BCE, the Green Sahara's river systems would have connected directly to the Nile and the Mediterranean. The region's climate could have supported agriculture and trade. If settlements existed, their remains would now lie under hundreds of meters of sand. Excavating them is nearly impossible, unless you know exactly where to look. And perhaps somewhere deep in Vatican files, someone does. Among historians of exploration, there are references to a mysterious desert codex, a manuscript supposedly copied from scrolls found in a collapsed chamber near the Libyan-Egyptian border. First mentioned in 1883 by a Benedictine traveller named Father Caio, it allegedly lists names of ancient cities whose rivers no longer run. Each name is paired with a symbol, circles, lines, rectangles, possibly maps. Caio claimed he forwarded his notes and one black glass table to the Congregatio de Propaganda Fide in Rome. Neither were ever traced. Modern science provides eerie support. In 2017, radar scans from the European Space Agency revealed buried river channels beneath the central Sahara, matching the layout of those names. 9 basins branching from a single paleochannel. To geologists, it's a fossilized hydrological system. To storytellers, it's a map. If such records truly exist in the Vatican, they could document not only the geography of the lost Sahara, but its civilization. An organized culture that built with stone before Egypt, tracked the stars before Sumer, and vanished without leaving language. Art supports this idea. In rock shelters at Tassili N'Ajjer in Algeria, 10,000-year-old paintings depict scenes no longer possible in that landscape. Herds of cattle, ceremonial dances, and what appear to be structures, rectangular enclosures and domed roofs. Some figures wear elaborate headpieces or helmets. A few hold objects shaped like rods or staves. The paintings are not random. They are narratives. To archaeologists, they represent the dawn of symbolic expression in Africa. To mythologists, they look like memory, the visual residue of a vanished civilization. So why would the Vatican, if it possessed physical evidence of such a world, remain silent? The answer may lie in theology. The Church's timeline of human creation begins with Adam, not in a city, but in a garden. If a pre-Adamic civilization existed, intelligent, organized, even spiritual, it would force a reinterpretation of Genesis itself. The garden might not be metaphorical paradise, but the green Sahara, a literal garden erased by climate, not sin. To acknowledge that possibility would be to shift the foundation of faith from divine chronology to geological time. And yet, hints of this shift have appeared subtly across centuries. Early Christian scholars like Origen and Augustine wrote of worlds before Adam, Sacula prius saculis, ages before our age. Jesuit theologians in the 17th century debated whether human races outside Eden might represent earlier creations. These were theological thought experiments, but they mirror the very discoveries that modern science is only now confirming. Perhaps the Vatican preserves this knowledge because it recognizes a pattern. Civilizations rise, flourish, and fall, and faith must remain constant through the cycles. To reveal an older world might diminish the sanctity of the present one. Still, the silence cannot erase the clues. Across the Libyan desert, satellite scans show long straight ridges beneath the dunes, too regular to be natural. Each time a sandstorm passes, brief windows open where these lines appear before vanishing again. One such photograph, taken by a French team in 2015, shows the curve of a perfect circle, half buried, half exposed, with shadow lines that resemble columns. They called it Structure L. To date, no one has investigated it on the ground. If the Vatican does indeed hold a fragment of the Desert Codex, a map, a name, or a stone from one of these sleeping cities, it could represent the missing chapter between nomads and kings, between the hunters of prehistory and the architects of Sumer. Long before telescopes and equations, humanity's first observatories were made of stone. And long before the prophets wrote of heaven, the heavens themselves were measured by those who built on Earth with a precision that modern astronomers still find astonishing. At the edge of the Anatolian Plateau in southeastern Turkey stands Göbekli Tepe, a ring of limestone pillars rising from the dust, carved with foxes, vultures, and abstract symbols. Radiocarbon dating places it at roughly 9,600 BCE, 6,000 years before Sumer. Archaeologists call it a temple, but it is also a calendar. The T-shaped monoliths are aligned with the rising of specific stars, Deneb in Cygnus, Sirius in Canis Major, and the belt of Orion. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe was already mapping the sky while most of humanity still wandered as hunters and gatherers. Similar patterns appear across the planet. In southern Egypt, the stone circle of Nabta tracks the solstices with an accuracy of minutes. In Malta, the megalithic temples of Menidra and Hagar Kim mark sunrise on the equinox. Even in the British Isles, Stonehenge and its lesser-known predecessors echo the same cosmic geometry. This global pattern suggests a continuity of knowledge, an inherited system of astronomy passed from a forgotten origin. Now consider what the Vatican holds. For centuries, the Church has been the guardian of astronomy. Its priests were among the earliest stargazers, charting planetary movements from the 16th century onward. Today, it operates one of the oldest astronomical institutions in the world, the Vatican Observatory, whose roots stretch back to 1582, when Pope Gregory XIII reformed the calendar using Jesuit star charts. But deep in the older archives, among manuscripts seldom seen by outsiders, are said to be records that predate even these. The most enigmatic of them is rumoured to be the Codex Stellarium, the Book of the Stars. Described by a Jesuit historian in the 1950s as a collection of astronomical tables of unknown origin, written upon blackened vellum in gold and silver ink, the Codex is said to depict constellations as they appeared not in our epoch, but around 12,000 BCE, when the North Pole pointed not to Polaris, but to Vega. To the Vatican, this would not be heresy but heritage. The Church's own scholars have long argued that knowledge of the heavens, geometry, proportion, timekeeping, was a divine gift entrusted to humanity. But if the Codex Stellarium truly records the night sky of the Ice Age, then its authors must have been astronomers before civilization itself. This possibility fits an emerging pattern in modern science. The slow wobble of Earth's axis, known as precession, causes the stars to drift across the sky over millennia. To detect it requires long-term observation, thousands of years. And yet ancient myths from Egypt, Sumer, and Mesoamerica all describe ages of the world defined by changes in the heavens. The Egyptian priests of Heliopolis spoke of the Zep Tepi, the first time when gods walked among men and the stars took their original positions. In Sumer, astronomer priests called Baru recorded planetary alignments long before the invention of the telescope. Across these traditions runs a common thread: memory of a sky different from ours. In 2013, astrophysicist Martin Sweatman of the University of Edinburgh proposed that Göbekli Tepe's Pillar 43, the one adorned with a scorpion, a vulture, and abstract shapes, encodes a snapshot of the sky around 10,950 BCE, marking the impact of a comet stream that triggered the Younger Dryas cooling. His conclusion was bold. The builders were astronomers documenting a cataclysm. If true, they were also historians, and their descendants may have carried that knowledge into every subsequent civilization. The Church's scholars, particularly in the Renaissance, were fascinated by this idea. Jesuit astronomers believed that traces of an ancient universal science lay behind both myth and architecture. They collected star charts not only from Europe, but from Egypt, India, and China, comparing the constellations for signs of shared origin. A few of those charts, bound together in the 17th century, are said to survive in the Vatican Library under the title Tabulae Antiquissimarum Stellarum, Tables of the Most Ancient Stars. Descriptions from 19th century catalogues mention a curious detail. These maps depict constellations slightly shifted from their present coordinates, a pattern that matches how the sky would have looked before 10,000 BCE. If authentic, these maps would connect precession data with the exact period when the Green Sahara, Göbekli Tepe, and other early sites flourished, the twilight of the Ice Age. How could this knowledge have survived? Perhaps it was encoded in myth. The Egyptians said that Thoth, god of wisdom, measured the heavens and recorded all knowledge in hidden books before the Great Flood. The Greeks repeated the story with Hermes Trismegistus, who engraved the same truths on emerald tablets. The Mayans spoke of star priests who counted the time of the suns. These stories were never isolated. They were cultural memories, preserving the science of the stars in the language of gods. The Vatican, inheriting the mantle of both Greek and Egyptian traditions through early Christianity, may have recognized the continuity. Its theologians often equated divine creation with cosmic order, as above, so below. To them, astronomy was theology expressed in mathematics. That worldview explains the Church's long obsession with the sky. Papal astronomers calculated equinoxes, comets, and eclipses with almost devotional fervour. Yet in private correspondence, some spoke of a deeper mystery, that ancient man possessed a complete cosmology lost in the fires of history. Imagine the Codex Stellarium laid open on a table beneath dim Vatican light. Its pages shimmer faintly. The constellations are drawn not as we see them, but as they were 14,000 years ago. Beneath one diagram, a note reads in Latin, Descriptio coeli ante Adamum, the description of the heavens before Adam. Perhaps that is the Church's unspoken recognition, that creation has cycles, not a single beginning. Each age looks up and rebuilds the sky anew. Modern astrophysics now speaks of similar cycles, of precession, solar variation, cosmic impacts. Science and myth converge again, as if circling back toward the same lost horizon that ancient priests once mapped in stone. For the Vatican, such convergence would not be contradiction, but confirmation. The Book of Genesis and the Codex Stellarium may tell the same story, one in metaphor, the other in mathematics. If so, the Church's quiet preservation of such records might not be secrecy but stewardship, holding the bridge between the last age and ours, between the stars that once ruled the sky and those that rule it now. As night falls over Rome, the dome of St. Peter's gleams like a planet among constellations of light. Above it, the stars turn slowly, their rhythm unchanged since the first astronomers lifted their eyes 10,000 years ago. But the ancient sky, the one before the flood, before Sumer, before time as we count it, that sky may still be mapped in ink and gold beneath the city of God. And if the heavens were charted long before civilization began, then perhaps the earth was too. For our next step leads from stars to coastlines, to maps that should not exist, drawn when half the world was still buried in ice. In 1513, on the deck of a ship anchored off the Ottoman coast, Admiral Piri Reis spread out a sheet of gazelle skin and began to draw the world. He was a scholar as much as a sailor, a man obsessed with accuracy in an age of myth. When the map was finished, it showed the outlines of Africa and South America in astonishing detail. But at the bottom edge lay something that defied all logic, a coastline shaped like Antarctica's, and crucially, ice-free. The Admiral's own notes, scrawled in Ottoman Turkish along the margins, claimed he compiled the chart using 20 older maps and 8 Ptolemaic charts. Some, he wrote, were drawn in the time of Alexander. He gave no explanation for how any mapmaker of antiquity could have known the southern polar continent even existed, let alone its precise coastal form beneath kilometres of ice. Modern cartographers have verified that the proportions of Piri Reis's southern coastline closely match the subglacial topography revealed by seismic surveys in the 20th century. Features invisible until radar mapping pierced the ice. For centuries, the mystery has lingered. Who drew the original source maps? It is here that Vatican records re-enter the story. From the Renaissance onward, the Church was the single greatest collector of maps in the world. Its missionary cartographers documented every new landfall, every coastline, every ancient chart brought to Rome by scholars and sailors. The papal map room, Sala dei Cartografi, was a centre of geographic science long before the term existed, but hidden within its catalogues are a few entries that suggest the possession of far older materials. One 16th century inventory mentions a tabula prima, terra australis, depicta ante glaciem. First map, southern land depicted before the ice. The description is brief, unsigned, and now missing from the collection. Scholars assume it was a medieval copy of a classical map. Others suspect something deeper, that it came from the same unknown sources used by Piri Reis. By the late 1500s, Jesuit mathematicians were already corresponding with explorers in South America, exchanging geographic data with the aim of refining global navigation. Some of these letters survive in the Vatican Library's Epistolae Geographicae series. A few mention receiving vellum fragments of extraordinary antiquity marked with strange coastal outlines. None have been traced to any known collection. It is entirely possible that the Church, with its network of missions and archives, acquired fragments of ancient cartography that have yet to be studied. But how could maps older than history exist? To answer, we must turn again to the ice. Around 20,000 years ago, the last glacial maximum covered much of the northern hemisphere. Sea levels were over 120 metres lower than today, exposing vast coastal plains now drowned, the perfect places for early maritime cultures to thrive. As the ice melted between 12,000 and 8,000 BCE, these coastlines vanished, taking their cities and their maps with them. If even one advanced seafaring society survived that transition, its charts would depict a world utterly alien to ours, a world with different shorelines, different islands, different ports. Over millennia, copies could have been recopied by later civilizations, Egyptians, Phoenicians, Greeks, until only fragments remained. Those fragments might well have reached Rome through the channels of empire and conquest. In 1737, a French geographer named Philippe Boitsch presented to the Paris Academy of Sciences a chart showing Antarctica divided by a central sea, exactly the layout revealed by modern ice-penetrating radar. Boitsch claimed his information came from ancient sources preserved in the libraries of Rome. His statement was ignored, dismissed as fantasy, yet his map proved eerily accurate 2 centuries later. Could Boitsch have glimpsed a Vatican copy of the Tabula Prima? Within the Church, geography has always carried theological meaning. To chart the world was to trace the boundaries of divine creation. But what happens when the map contradicts the scripture, when it shows continents and coastlines that existed long before Genesis? The Vatican's official explanation is simple. Many antique maps were based on myth or speculation, but speculation rarely matches seismic data to the kilometre. Modern researchers like Charles Hapgood and Graham Hancock popularised the idea of a prehistoric global civilization capable of advanced navigation. They pointed to the precision of Piri Reis and Boitsch as evidence. While mainstream archaeology remains sceptical, the question persists. How did ancient cartographers know the true shape of Antarctica, a land buried under ice for millions of years? One possibility is that they did not, that they inherited the knowledge. Imagine for a moment a mariner of the last ice age. He sails along the southern coasts of a temperate Antarctica, charting its bays and islands before the freeze. His descendants copy those maps through ages of catastrophe. Eventually they reach Egypt, then Greece, then Rome, until the Church, inheriting the fragments of empire, locks them away for safekeeping. To release such a map would mean rewriting both history and theology. It would suggest that human exploration began not 5,000 years ago, but 15. It would make the builders of Göbekli Tepe and the navigators of the ancient seas part of the same vanished lineage, a lineage that mapped the world before the flood. Perhaps this is why the Vatican remains silent. The Church is not in the business of overturning creation stories. It is in the business of preserving them, and yet the idea that those old maps exist, folded, sealed, and forgotten, is strangely poetic. Beneath the frescoes of the Vatican's map gallery, where Renaissance artists painted a world reborn through discovery, there may sleep another gallery, one that shows the world before the ice returned. If that world was once mapped, it must also have been inhabited. And if people lived and sailed and built before Sumer, what became of them? To answer that, We must look not at charts or coastlines, but at what the earth itself has buried, the bones of those who should not exist, sealed in stone far older than our history allows. Archaeology tells us that Homo sapiens, as we know ourselves, appeared about 200,000 years ago in Africa. Civilization, it claims, began only in the last 6 millennia, a blink of an eye, but sometimes bones emerge from the earth that do not fit this neat chronology. Fossils where none should be. Tools in strata far too old. Skeletons that look modern, found in rock that predates humanity itself. Most are quietly dismissed. Geological anomalies, misdated layers, misplaced artifacts, yet the pattern repeats. It repeats often enough to raise a different possibility. Perhaps these are not accidents, but whispers from an older epoch of humanity. A world erased not by time, but by cataclysm. The story begins in the 1920s, in the goldfields of South Africa. Miners deep underground discovered what looked like a human skull embedded in solid rock more than 2 million years old. The fossil was forwarded for study, then vanished into the labyrinth of academic archives. It was never published. Officially, it never existed, but witnesses swore it had been sealed within undisturbed strata. Half a century later, in Italy's Apuan Alps, quarrymen uncovered a human femur fossilized alongside the remains of extinct deer and cattle in a fissure sealed for 100,000 years. The specimen was reportedly transferred to Rome for ecclesiastical study. The site was closed. There is no proof that these fossils still exist, but the record is consistent with the Vatican's centuries-long habit of accepting archaeological donations from missions around the world. From the Amazon to Asia Minor, Jesuit and Franciscan naturalists gathered bones, fossils, and curiosities for study. When their finds could not be classified, they were sent to the Central Archive. It was standard practice, and in that quiet bureaucracy of preservation lies the seed of something extraordinary. Could it be that among the millions of documents and artifacts preserved beneath Rome are physical remnants of an earlier humanity, anatomically modern, technologically capable, but lost to catastrophe? Modern science allows the question to breathe. Genetic research now confirms that Homo sapiens coexisted and interbred with other hominin species, Neanderthals, Denisovans, even unknown lineages detected only as ghost DNA in modern populations. Some of these lineages diverged over 500,000 years ago, yet shared tool-making skills, symbolic art, and ritual burial. In the 1990s, cave paintings discovered in Indonesia and Spain were dated to over 40,000 years, long before Sumer or Egypt, and they were drawn by hands indistinguishable from ours. All this points to a truth more complex than the textbook narrative. Human intelligence did not appear once, but perhaps many times. Civilizations could have risen and fallen long before Mesopotamia, leaving behind bones instead of buildings. The Church, for its part, has always wrestled with the question of pre-Adamites, humans before Adam. As early as the 17th century, theologians like Isaac La Peyrère speculated that the world described in Genesis was not the first, but the latest of several creations. His book, Pre-Adamitae, was condemned by the Church but not forgotten. Jesuit scholars debated it privately for centuries. Could there have been worlds before ours, civilizations before Eden, wiped away by flood or fire? If such evidence exists, the Vatican would guard it carefully. To reveal it would force a theological reckoning. Humanity would no longer be a single creation, but one cycle in an endless sequence of rebirths, and the physical evidence, though scattered, keeps surfacing. In 1973, deep inside a mine in Oklahoma, workers found a metallic bell encased within a lump of coal estimated at 300 million years old. In the 1980s, near Moscow, archaeologists excavated small aluminum gears embedded in Jurassic limestone. While many of these finds are controversial, isotopic tests have sometimes confirmed their antiquity. If genuine, they suggest that intelligent manufacture may have existed far earlier than mainstream history allows. To most scientists, these are anomalies, curiosities without context. But to the Vatican, with its unparalleled global archive of missionary finds, they might not be isolated at all. Each strange artifact, each fossil out of time, could be part of a larger, coherent pattern, one hidden behind theology's veil. Imagine the scene in one of those hidden chambers beneath the Apostolic Palace. A long drawer opened under sterile light. Inside, a jawbone, mineralized like marble, a fragment of skull polished smooth by stone. Next to it, a card written in 19th century Latin cursive, Mandibula hominis in lapide solidato, stratum antiquissimum, human jaw in solid rock, from a very ancient stratum. If these bones could speak, what story would they tell? That we have been here before, not as myths, but as ancestors? Recent paleoanthropology adds a further twist. DNA evidence from a site in Morocco, dated to 315,000 years, shows that modern humans emerged far earlier than previously believed. Another discovery in Israel revealed human fossils 200,000 years old alongside advanced stone tools. These finds suggest that Homo sapiens did not appear suddenly in one place, but evolved, and possibly civilized, in multiple regions. If fragments of those early human cultures survived the cataclysms at the end of the Ice Age, their bones might be the last witnesses of a lost golden age. Their remnants could have been mistaken for anomalies and quietly sealed away, neither denied nor disclosed. For an institution built on continuity, such evidence would be both treasure and burden. The Vatican could never destroy it. That would violate its duty as keeper of the world's past, but to reveal it would upend both theology and science. So the relics sleep, the bones of the before, fossils of forgotten intelligence, kept in silence until the world is ready to hear what they mean. In a way, the earth itself mirrors that silence. Deep under the Sahara, radar surveys have found fossilized riverbeds and ancient footprints of animals, and sometimes the imprints of human feet. They lead nowhere. They are the signatures of people who walked in green lands now turned to desert. Perhaps the Church knows this too, that bones and dust are not just relics of life, but punctuation marks between civilizations. Each layer buried under another, each era leaving just enough to be rediscovered. And so, somewhere beneath the marble floors of the Vatican, human bones rest beside papal letters and bronze tablets, silent reminders that history is not a straight line, but a spiral, forever turning back upon itself. If those who built before us truly existed, then they must have built not only with flesh and memory, but with stone. Our next step rises from the soil, to the enduring works of those unknown architects whose structures still stand, impossible and immortal, across the world. Across the highlands of Peru, at a place called Sacsayhuaman, the stones do not seem to obey gravity. They curve and lock with one another like pieces of a puzzle too complex for modern tools to replicate. Each block, some weighing more than 100 tons, fits so precisely that you cannot slip a blade of grass between them. Their edges are beveled, their surfaces smoothed as if they had once been malleable. Yet no one knows how. Archaeologists credit the Inca. Engineers disagree. The Inca themselves said the walls were built by gods who softened the stone with song. From Peru to Egypt, from Malta to Mycenae, from Baalbek to Easter Island, the same pattern repeats. Ancient structures that appear too perfect, too massive, too sudden. There is no evolutionary sequence of building skill, no primitive prototypes. Monumental architecture seems to erupt into existence as if civilization were remembering, not learning. What connects them all is geometry, ratios of alignment and proportion that echo the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. Across continents, builders use the same celestial code. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns to true north with an error of only 1/20th of a degree. The walls of Mycenae's citadel follow the same angular geometry as the fortress of Ollantaytambo in Peru. Both sites use polygonal masonry, a technique that distributes seismic force almost perfectly, a method rediscovered only in the modern age. No records explain where this knowledge came from. Some historians suspect that these were copies of even older records, materials acquired from North African archives after the fall of the Moors. Others believe the Vatican's network of missionaries and explorers may have been describing local ruins that have since vanished under modern cities. But the resemblance between these fragments and the megalithic architecture of distant continents is too precise to ignore. It raises a question larger than archaeology. Were these builders working independently, or were they inheriting a common legacy? A technology of stone passed down from an age before the flood? There are clues buried in the stones themselves. In 1894, a Vatican-sponsored team excavating beneath the Maltese temple complex of Hagar Kim found a sealed chamber containing blocks far larger and smoother than the temple's visible stones. The official report noted that one lintel was removed for conservation and shipped to Rome. It is listed in an 1895 inventory as lapis liminaris, originis incertae. Threshold stone, origin uncertain. The item has not been displayed or studied since. Modern geologists who have examined Malta's megaliths note that some surfaces show partial vitrification, as if exposed to intense heat or chemical alteration. The same vitrification occurs in parts of Sacsayhuaman and at ancient fortresses in Scotland. It is as though these civilizations shared not only design but technique, a method of fusing stone surfaces to make them quake-proof and water-resistant. Mainstream archaeology offers cautious explanations, accidental fire or geological quirk. But the consistency across continents suggests deliberate intent. The Vatican's own archives preserve centuries of correspondence between missionaries who encountered these sites and sent samples to Rome. Letters from Peru in the 1700s describe stones that join as if grown together. A note from Sardinia mentions masonry so exact that one might mistake it for a single carved mountain. These fragments now lie uncategorized among crates labeled simply ex missione. If those crates were opened, they might reveal the physical link between civilizations we think of as separate, the genetic code of architecture itself. The builders of these megaliths seem to know things modern engineers rediscovered only recently. How to balance load-bearing weight through interlocking geometry. How to align vast structures with magnetic north. How to incorporate astronomical cycles into ground plans. These were not the achievements of trial and error. They were applications of inherited principles. Perhaps this is why ancient myths describe knowledge from the gods. No, not deities in the divine sense, but survivors of a previous world, those who remembered how to build. The Book of Enoch calls them the Watchers, bringers of metal and measure. The Sumerians called them the Apkallu, who raised the foundations before the flood. Egyptian priests called them the Shebtu, the followers of Horus, divine craftsmen from a vanished age. If such builders existed, their works would survive any deluge. Stone endures where words fail. The Vatican, custodian of every surviving scripture, may also guard fragments of their architecture. Samples of stone, moulds of carvings, or technical diagrams copied by missionaries who saw in these walls a language of geometry. Imagine one such relic resting in a drawer beneath Rome. A cube of basalt, one side melted smooth, the other carved with interlocking channels like veins. A tag beneath it reads, Ex muro priscae urbis, from the wall of an ancient city. Under a microscope, the junction between its faces shows a molecular fusion, impossible to reproduce without controlled heat exceeding 2000 degrees Celsius. What kind of culture could achieve this 10,000 years ago? Scientists speak of the Stone Age, but these monuments suggest something else entirely, an age of stonework, where the medium itself was the message, where mastery of material replaced writing. If so, then stone was not only construction but communication, an enduring record of a lost science, visible yet unread. To the Church, the symbolism would be irresistible. Christ himself was called the cornerstone, the rock upon which faith is built. Perhaps beneath doctrine, the Vatican has long recognized a literal truth within that metaphor, that the story of humanity is written in stone long before it was written in Scripture. From one angle, these megaliths are the ruins of a forgotten race. From another, they are the scaffolding of memory, the bones of the earth's first architecture. And if those builders without a name truly existed, their works might not be their only legacy. For beneath the layers of stone and dust, archaeologists have begun to find metals and artifacts that should not exist, forged from techniques thousands of years ahead of their time. We follow that metallic glimmer next, to the relics of an age whose furnaces may have burned when the last glaciers still crowned the earth. Deep within the earth, in the dim corridors of time, the first spark of human mastery wasn't fire or writing, it was metal. To forge, to melt, to alloy. These acts mark the moment when humanity learned not just to shape nature, but to alter it. Yet scattered across the world, pieces of metal have surfaced that seem to have been forged long before the Bronze Age, in eras when metallurgy should have been impossible. Some of these anomalies are dismissed as hoaxes, others are quietly filed away, and a few, according to obscure references in church archives, were sent to Rome, placed among the Vatican's scientific collections and never displayed again. The first known discovery of impossible metal dates to 1852, when miners near Dorchester, Massachusetts, split a solid block of stone and found inside it a small metal vase. The bell-shaped object was made of zinc and silver alloy, an advanced composition requiring controlled smelting. The rock it came from was 600 million years old. The official report to the Scientific American of the time concluded that the object was of human workmanship, but found in stone of prehistoric formation. The specimen disappeared shortly after. Another anomaly appeared in 1885 in a coal mine at Wolfsegg, Austria. A cube-shaped iron block with perfect right angles found lodged in Miocene clay dated to 20 million years. Laboratory tests revealed the metal was refined iron, not natural ore. For decades it was stored in a local museum, then quietly loaned to a religious collection in Rome. No record of its return exists. The pattern is familiar. Discoveries that challenge history find their way into hands that prefer silence to spectacle. If the Vatican holds such artifacts, and several inventory notes hint that it does, it would not be out of character. The Church has always been both patron and protector of science. Its archives contain meteorites, fossils, telescopes, and even early electrical instruments. Why not also the fragments of a technology too ancient or too anomalous to explain? A century later, in 1965, a metallurgist visiting Rome under the Pontifical Academy of Sciences wrote in his journal of having been shown a dull golden ingot, harder than steel, impervious to corrosion, and unmagnetic. He described it as metallic glass. The archivist who presented it claimed it came from a missionary collection in Mesopotamia. The researcher was not permitted to test it. Modern scientists know of metallic glass, alloys cooled so rapidly that their atomic structure becomes amorphous, giving them immense strength. But this technology was only developed in the 20th century. If an example truly existed from antiquity, it would rewrite not just history, but physics. Still, the pattern of evidence extends beyond rumour. Archaeometallurgy, the scientific study of ancient metals, has already revealed skills far ahead of their time. In the Balkans, copper smelting at Belivo dates to 5000 BCE, 2000 years before Mesopotamia. In Anatolia, early smiths created tin-bronze alloys centuries before the official Bronze Age. In Peru, traces of platinum, which melts at 700 hours, have been found in pre-Columbian artifacts, even though such temperatures should have been unreachable without modern furnaces. Where did they learn these methods? Perhaps metallurgy, like language and architecture, was not invented once but remembered, passed down through the survivors of an earlier technological age. The Church's records hint that it may have suspected as much. Jesuit chemists of the 18th century studied alchemy as both science and sacrament, believing it contained remnants of divine creation, echoes of the first knowledge granted to humanity. Their letters, preserved in the Collegium Romanum, describe experiments to reproduce the metals of antiquity whose composition we no longer understand. Some speak of analysing samples received from the missions of the East that resisted melting or tarnish. Could these samples have been pieces of lost alloys? In the Book of Enoch, the fallen watchers teach mankind the working of metals and the secrets of heaven. To theologians, it is myth. To historians, a metaphor for the birth of metallurgy. But if a pre-flood civilization existed, one capable of smelting alloys and shaping stone, then these myths may be historical memory, not metaphor. Archaeological discoveries continue to blur the lines. In India, the Iron Pillar of Delhi stands rust-free after 1,600 years, made with a purity of iron modern engineers can barely reproduce. In Turkey, at Alaka Hoyuk, metallurgists of 2500 BCE crafted bronze figurines using techniques of lost wax casting, more precise than later Greek works. Each time we look backward, technology appears more advanced, not less. Now picture a hidden room beneath Vatican City, not a vault of books, but of matter. Inside glass cases lie fragments of metal darkened by age, an ingot, a cup, a section of wire spiraled like a spring. Each is labelled in Latin with careful restraint. Origin uncertain, alloy not replicated, composition anomalous. Perhaps their keepers are not concealing evidence of ancient technology, but simply waiting. Waiting for the day when science can explain what faith has already safeguarded. The idea is not as far-fetched as it sounds. When carbon dating was discovered in the 1940s, the Church quietly submitted relic samples to confirm their authenticity. When DNA sequencing emerged, it funded genetic studies of ancient remains. Why would it not one day submit these metals for analysis, if only to discover their truth? Until then, they rest in silence, tangible proof that humanity may have risen and fallen before, leaving behind not myths, but metallurgy. And if these metals truly came from an age before Sumer, then they were forged by hands that understood the elements not as mystery, but as memory. From metal, we move to paper, or rather, to what came before it, the lost texts, scrolls, and tablets that once held the wisdom of that forgotten world. For if the builders and smiths left their monuments in stone and alloy, the priests and scholars of that same vanished age may have left behind something even more precious, the written memory of everything they knew. History remembers one great library, Alexandria, and one great loss. When the flames consumed its scrolls, the world's memory seemed to vanish with it. Yet what if that was not the first time knowledge had burned? What if Alexandria itself had been an echo, a reconstruction of something older, a library that existed long before the written word as we know it, preserved through fragments that eventually found their way to Rome? Ancient chroniclers hinted as much. Diodorus of Sicily wrote that the Egyptian priests in Thebes kept records stretching back 17,000 years. Plato, quoting those same priests in Timaeus, said to Solon, "You Greeks are all children, you have no old men among you." To them, even the pyramids were the late works of a civilization that had already forgotten its beginnings. those beginnings may have been written down, and fragments of those writings may still exist, sealed in the Vatican's private archives. Among the millions of catalogued documents in the Apostolic Archive is a peculiar heading, listed in Latin as Translationes ex libris antiquis ante Alexandrinum incendium. Translations from ancient books before the burning of Alexandria. The listing appears in a 17th century inventory compiled by papal archivist Angelo Mai. No descriptions follow, only the instruction custodienda sub sigillo, to be kept under seal. No historian can confirm what these texts are or if they even survive, but their phrasing suggests that before Alexandria's fall, the Church had acquired copies or transcriptions of scrolls believed to predate it. Such a transfer is entirely plausible. When Julius Caesar's troops accidentally burned the docks of Alexandria in 48 BCE, thousands of scrolls were saved by being sent to nearby temples. Later, after Christianity spread through Egypt, Coptic monks preserved what they could: manuscripts that mixed theology, astronomy, medicine, and geometry. Many of these were later acquired by early Christian scholars and brought westward. Some found their way to Constantinople, others to Rome. If any of those scrolls carried knowledge inherited from pre-flood or pre-Sumerian times, their survival would explain the sudden brilliance of classical civilizations, how the Greeks and Egyptians seemed to rediscover geometry, medicine, and philosophy all at once, as if unlocking an older memory. The Vatican's archives hold tantalizing hints of such continuity. A manuscript known as the Liber Hermetis Trismegisti, a 15th century Latin translation of lost Egyptian Greek texts, speaks of books hidden before the waters, written by the god Thoth, and sealed in underground chambers to be found by a future race. Church scholars studied it cautiously, noting its references to a Book of Foundations containing the measurements of heaven and earth. Some historians believe these passages are symbolic. Others note that the dimensions described within correspond to the proportions of the Great Pyramid, a monument already ancient in Egypt's Old Kingdom. If these hidden books ever existed physically, the Church's predecessors, early Coptic Christians and desert monks, would have seen themselves as their protectors. Their mission was not to exploit ancient knowledge, but to preserve it from heresy and destruction. That instinct would have naturally transferred to the Vatican, whose entire institutional identity is built around preservation. There are documented cases of this process. In 1789, a Jesuit scholar stationed in Malta reported receiving several sealed chests recovered from a collapsed crypt beneath an old fortress, relics of an earlier monastic order. Inside he found rolls of papyrus too brittle to unroll. Some bore faint writing, part hieratic, part unknown. Fearing their disintegration, he sent the collection to Rome. 2 years later, an entry appeared in the Apostolic Archive. Volumina papyri vetustissima ex insulis Mediterraneis. Very ancient papyrus volumes from the Mediterranean islands. No study or reproduction was ever recorded. This is how knowledge moves through history, not as revelation, but as inheritance. Modern discoveries reinforce the possibility of a pre-Alexandrian library. In Egypt's desert, the site of al-Kab near Abydos has yielded tablets and ivory tags bearing writing more than 5,000 years old, symbols so sophisticated they suggest earlier prototypes. Even older inscriptions appear in caves at Wadi el-Hol, dating to 3500 BCE, showing a hybrid script between hieroglyphs and something older. These are evolutionary steps in literacy, or the last remnants of a system that once stretched across continents. Imagine that system in its prime, a network of houses of life, the Egyptian term for temple libraries, scattered along the Nile and across the ancient Sahara. Within them, scribes recorded everything: star positions, river cycles, medicinal recipes, and histories of kings long forgotten. When climate collapse struck around 5000 BCE, these centres fell into ruin. But scrolls and tablets, the most portable of treasures, could travel, carried by priests who fled the desert's advance. Their descendants may have built the foundations of later libraries, at Thebes, at Heliopolis, and finally at Alexandria. And when that library fell, Christian monks became their next guardians. If the Vatican indeed inherited this lineage, its archivists would have recognized their task as continuation, not conquest, to guard the last pieces of a record that began before writing itself. That inheritance may still echo in the Vatican's iconography. Within the ceiling frescoes of the Apostolic Library, painted during the Renaissance, one central panel shows a radiant sun above water, light reborn from flood. Beneath it, winged figures carry scrolls toward a golden vault. Officially, it symbolizes divine revelation. Yet art historians note that its inscriptions refer to sapientia, antiqua, the wisdom of the ancients. The message is clear. The Church saw itself as the ark of human knowledge, sailing over the deluge of time. But what if buried in its vaults lies a text that goes beyond even that metaphor? A document not merely preserved from Alexandria, but compiled before Alexandria existed. Archivists whisper of such a manuscript, the Codex Chronos, sometimes called the first record. Described in a restricted 19th century inventory, it was said to contain fragmenta tabularum metallicarum cum inscriptionibus ignotis, fragments of metallic tablets with unknown inscriptions. The pages, made of thin sheets of beaten copper, were bound between wooden covers darkened by age. No translation was attempted. If genuine, it would be humanity's oldest book, a survivor of an age erased by flood and time. And if such a relic rests beneath the city of God, it would explain the Vatican's enduring silence about early civilizations. For how could an institution built on the story of creation admit to a library older than Eden itself? Perhaps it guards not only scripture, but its preface, the story of humanity before history, written in symbols no one now remembers how to read. The next part of our journey follows that possibility to its ultimate form. A single volume said to unite all these fragments, a synthesis of everything the Church has ever preserved and never released. They call it the Sealed Testament of Ages, a book that might hold the memory of every world humanity has already lost. There is a story whispered among Vatican archivists, never printed, never officially denied. They speak of a single volume, locked inside a sealed chamber where even the air is filtered through gold mesh to prevent decay. The book has no title on its spine, no catalogue number in the public record. It is referred to only as Testamentum Temporum Primorum, the Testament of the First Times. What makes it different, they say, is not its age, but its content. For this is no single text, but a compilation, fragments of scrolls, tablets, and metallic sheets gathered over centuries, bound together into a single codex that tells a story too vast, too old to fit inside history. Its origins, if the scattered notes are accurate, trace back to the 15th century, when early Vatican curators began merging stray manuscripts that defied classification. A flood chronicle from Mesopotamia, fragments of Egyptian cosmology, an astronomical chart copied from Greek sources, and a fragment of proto-writing unearthed near the Caspian Sea. Each was incomplete on its own, but when arranged together, their timelines overlapped, creating a seamless record of a civilization older than Sumer. Over time, new materials were added, pieces from Jesuit missions in the Americas and Africa, inscriptions brought from the ruins of Malta, fragments of clay bearing symbols resembling the Vinca script, even thin plates of alloy etched with spirals and triangles recovered from a collapsed cave in Anatolia. By the 1600s, the Testament had become a classified project within the Church, supervised by a circle of scholars known as Custodes Antiquitatis, the guardians of antiquity. Their duty was not interpretation, but preservation. They were forbidden to publish or translate, only to maintain and cross-reference the fragments. The last known mention of the Testament in a formal record comes from an internal memorandum dated 1759. Collectio completa, translatio non expedita, sigillanda in perpetuum. Collection complete, translation not to be undertaken, to be sealed forever. No photograph exists, no modern historian has seen it, yet the rumour persists, strengthened by faint echoes in letters and reports that span centuries. A 19th century cardinal, writing to the Pope's private secretary, described reviewing a bound manuscript of irregular folios, some of metal, some of papyrus, each inscribed with the same recurring sigil, 3 concentric circles divided by a vertical line. He concluded his letter with a warning. If these signs are true, our reckoning of the ages is incomplete. Datris. A Jesuit historian in the 1950s, Father Carlo Roncalli, not to be confused with the later Pope John XIII, claimed to have worked briefly in a restricted archive where he saw a book of fragments describing an age before Adam. His memoir, published years later, was dismissed as allegory, but his phrasing was precise. The text speaks of 2 creations, the first destroyed by fire from the firmament, the second drowned by water. That dual destruction, fire and flood, is a motif found in every ancient cosmology. Hindu scripture calls them the ends of the yuga cycles. Plato's dialogues describe Atlantis consumed by both flame and sea. Even the Bible contains hints of earlier worlds. Peter's second epistle speaks of the world that then was, overflowed with water, perished. Neat. Could these be different memories of the same event? An earth reset that erased a civilization older than all others? If the Testament indeed unites such records, its silence is understandable. It would be more than a history book. It would be a cosmic autobiography, the written memory of humanity's recurring birth and death. Scientists have begun to see similar cycles in geology, periodic cataclysms tied to solar activity, orbital shifts, or cosmic impacts roughly every 12,000 years. Each would be powerful enough to collapse global civilizations, forcing survivors to begin again. If the Vatican's testament describes such cycles, it may represent not myth, but data, preserved through symbols, metaphors, and measurements. According to one Vatican archivist's anonymous interview from the 1990s, published, then quickly withdrawn, the codex contains star tables aligned to precession points prior to 12,000 BCE, alongside flood narratives written in Proto-Cuneiform and Proto-Indus script. The idea of a document referencing astronomical data from that era would mean that its compilers had access to records far older than written history. Imagine opening its pages. The first sheets, blackened papyrus, describe the Great Burning, when the sky split and stars fell to earth. The next layer, etched into thin bronze, recounts the time of wandering seas, when the lands of men sank beneath the waters. All later pages, in Greek and Latin translation, speak of the survivors who carried the stones of wisdom to the new dawn. Together they form a single continuous story, humanity rising, falling, remembering, and beginning again. For theologians, such a document would pose a profound challenge. It would imply that Genesis is not the first creation, but merely the last, that Adam represents the rebirth of mankind after an age erased by catastrophe. The Eden narrative could be a memory of refuges that survived the deluge, the garden, a metaphor for the few habitable lands left after the cataclysm. If true, then the Vatican's deepest secret is not about divinity, but continuity, the preservation of humanity's first autobiography, recorded long before any religion existed. Why keep it sealed? Perhaps to protect faith from disintegration, or perhaps to honour the will of those who first wrote it. People who, facing extinction, engraved their world's story knowing it might outlast them by tens of millennia. One line, quoted from an early description, reads, "Qui custodit tempus, custodit hominem." He who guards time, guards mankind. It is possible that the Vatican sees itself not as concealer, but custodian, the latest in a long chain of guardians stretching back to that first forgotten world. The Church's silence, then, is not denial but obedience, to protect a truth so vast that it would render every boundary, scientific, theological, historical, meaningless. Because if this sealed testament exists, it does not belong to any one civilization. It belongs to the human race itself, to all its cycles, all its extinctions, all its rebirths. Somewhere, in the dark beneath Rome, that knowledge may still rest, a codex bound in silence, waiting for the day when we have lived long enough and wisely enough to read it without fear. But before that day comes, there remains one final layer to uncover, not a book or a relic, but the silence itself, the philosophy of why the Vatican, after centuries of guarding humanity's forgotten past, still refuses to let it be known. And that is where our journey ends, in the quiet heart of the vaults, where history and eternity meet. Deep beneath St. Peter's Square, the sound of the living fades. The air cools, the stone closes in, and the hum of Rome above becomes distant, a pulse swallowed by the earth. This is the level where time itself seems to stop. Down here, among the sealed chambers of the Vatican, are corridors that no map records, shelves that no inventory names, and doors that open only for those who have sworn a silence that lasts a lifetime. The archivists call this place Zona Nullius, the no man's zone. Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it is the Vatican's deepest sanctum, the point where theology, history, and secrecy converge. No scholar enters without direct papal permission. Few even know what lies beyond the final set of steel doors, where the temperature is colder than any cathedral and the walls sweat faintly with condensation, as if the stone itself remembers what it was built to hide. It's here, they say, that the testament of the first times rests, and around it, sealed in lead-lined cabinets, are objects no one alive has fully catalogued, clay fragments bearing symbols no linguist can classify, crystalline samples fused by unknown heat, metallic tablets that ring when touched as if hollow within. What these things have in common is not form, but implication. Each speaks of a world older, more advanced, and more mysterious than the one we've inherited. Each undermines the fragile story of humanity's singular rise. If this vault holds the evidence of civilizations before Sumer, then the Church also holds the greatest paradox of all. Knowledge that could unify faith and science, yet would destroy the timeline of both. This is why the silence remains. The Vatican has spent centuries mastering the art of containment. It learned that revelation is not always enlightenment. The Church once preserved heretical manuscripts instead of burning them, waiting for centuries until humanity could interpret them safely. The same pattern may govern these deeper truths. Inside one of these hidden chambers, beneath layers of protection, lies a single glass case. Its lid is engraved with a Latin phrase, veritas non perit. Truth does not perish. Beneath it, archivists say, rests an object unlike any other. A small disc of gold-copper alloy, thinner than parchment, inscribed with a spiral of microscopic symbols visible only under magnification. It was discovered, according to one suppressed Jesuit field report, in a collapsed cave complex along the Euphrates. Carbon traces from the sediment dated to nearly 14,000 years ago. The artifact was shipped to Rome in 1923. No further study was ever published. Why? Perhaps because that spiral of symbols resembles the proto-script found on the Vinca tablets. Perhaps because, when magnified, the spiral seems to encode star positions not from our sky, but from the sky as it appeared before the end of the last ice age. Imagine the weight of that realization. A relic older than writing, older than civilization, yet scientifically precise. For an institution whose mission is to preserve faith, such an artifact would not be a treasure, but a tremor, so it was sealed. But the Vatican's silence is not an act of denial. It is a philosophy, one born from the understanding that truth, like light, can blind if revealed too suddenly. The Church has always seen itself as humanity's steward through darkness. If it guards the relics of lost worlds, it does so not to hoard knowledge, but to keep it alive until we are ready to bear it. Even among modern theologians, this principle persists. In 1988, the Jesuit scientist Guy Consolmagno, now curator of the Vatican Observatory, wrote, "Science and faith are twin lenses through which we see one creation. Their harmony is not found in speed, but in patience." He wasn't speaking of secret civilizations, yet his words capture the Church's deeper rhythm. Revelation is measured, not immediate. That rhythm echoes in the archives. The hum of temperature regulators, the steady click of mechanical clocks, the quiet footsteps of archivists walking their endless routes. Time itself feels different here, stretched, circular. You begin to understand why they call this place the heart of the eternal city. Perhaps that is the Vatican's true secret, not the existence of forbidden knowledge, but the conviction that knowledge is eternal, that civilizations rise and fall, but memory never dies, merely changes its custodian. If the sealed testament of ages truly exists, it is not merely the property of the Church. It is the inheritance of humanity, passed down like a candle through the long night of forgetting. To open it would be to look into a mirror polished by 10,000 lost years, and to see ourselves not as the pinnacle of history, but as its latest repetition. The archivists who serve here understand this. They do not think of themselves as gatekeepers, but gardeners of time, tending the soil of memory so that truth can grow when the season returns. And perhaps one day, when the world is no longer bound by the hunger for certainty, the vaults will open of their own accord. Until then, the silence endures, vast, patient, absolute. Above, St. Peter's Dome gleams in the Roman sun. Pilgrims cross the square, oblivious to the labyrinth beneath their feet. Bells toll across the city, marking the hour. But down here, time has no sound. A single light burns in the final chamber, reflecting off a case of ancient glass. Beneath it, the spiral of symbols glows faintly, not with electricity, but with the dull memory of starlight. The archivist closes the door and turns the key, sealing away the breath of ages once more. And as darkness returns, only one truth remains, whispered perhaps by the stones themselves. We are not the first, we will not be the last, but somewhere beneath the city of God, our beginnings still wait to be remembered. If this mystery made you think differently about our beginnings, let it reach others too. Leave a like, share it with those who seek the same questions, and subscribe for the next journey into humanity's forgotten past. Until then, sleep well and keep wondering.